Now let's create a site modeler project. So we're going to begin on page 2 of our training guide, where we talk about the site modeler project, and we're going to open up a CAD file. It's located in our project folder called Data Geo Site Modeler Lab 2 SitePlan2D.dgn. So open that up with Power Civil, and once we have that, we're going to access our modeling tool. From Civil, pull down menu, go to Modeler, and that'll launch up a project wizard. This project wizard is something we'd access every time we want to get into Modeler, and we're either going to open a project or create a new one. In my case, I want to create a new one. So I select Create New Project versus Open, and I click Next. And just like any wizard, it's going to have a Next button, a Previous button, and you'll be able to go back and forth until you're, or go forward until you're done, or go back to fix things, and so forth. First thing is to give it a name. So the project file, this container of our surfaces, is going to be SitePlan2D.gsf. It's just going to take on the default name of the file, basically the name of the DGN file, and then it'll add a GSF extension. So that's good. I'll click Next. I'm going to create a model, give it a name. I'll call it Tower, because this is an office tower. Now, the model, it's going to be empty at first, but we'll create a model. Next, I'm going to click Set Project Preferences. Every project file has preferences. We are talking about surfaces and triangulating surfaces, so we have to come up with some basic DTM settings. Our Site Preferences dialog has several options that we need to fill out. These could pretty much stay the same from project to project, so therefore we give you the ability to save these off. In our case, we actually have one saved off that we want to open, so we can go File, Open, and we can go to our Data Geo Site folder, find our Standards folder, and we have a BiLevel.spf that was part of the dataset. That is the settings file for the site preferences. And what it does is it fills in all the information based on my preferences. So you can see my stroking preferences here. Under Project Components, it points to a DDB file, which we'll take advantage of later. It'll help us draw things that we haven't taken the time to draw yet, and make sure that those exist in the right level, color, and weight, and so forth when we draw them. So it's kind of a CAD standards or setting standards file. Visualization, how do we want to view the surfaces that we're creating? When you're working with surfaces, it's nice to see contours and triangles maybe and stuff like that. So how do we want to view those? And we set that up here under Model Visualization. And in my case, we're going to view the model that we create with contours every 25 and 5. So I'm not going to see triangles and labels and such. I just want to see the contours. And if I want to make changes to anything here, I simply double click on the sample graphic to make the change. Under the Objects option, this is where we can set up different object types that we might create. In my project, I'm going to have roadways and buildings and ponds and so forth. So I've created object types for each one, just so I can want to see things different depending on what object I'm working on. So for example, roadways, the contour interval is 1 and 0.2. When I get to a pond, the contour interval is 5 and 1. So you can have different display settings, just like in the model. You can have different display settings for these surfaces depending on which type of object you're working with. And not only do you have different display, but this, if you remember my description of objects, they have side slopes. What are these side slopes? So each object type we can assign default side slopes. In this case, the roadway, I have 3 to 1. So it's going to come off of the edge of whatever my road is and come down 3 to 1 until it ties to the ground surface. And each object type can have its own default slopes. Now after the object is part of the model, I can change those. So I can create 10 ponds and change the slopes on all 10 of them to different slopes, side slopes. So, but they have to have some sort of default when I bring it in. Updating, we're going to auto-update the model. So as we make changes, and the contours will redefine themselves and update so that we can see the most up-to-date current surface. We have associations turned on, so that if we make changes to an element and elements are associated to it, those elements will update. And then look under the save option. We're not saving this file on the fly, but we could always set up an automatic save. So once you work with the project file and you want to save things, you have to actually initiate the save from the pull-down menu. Go in, Modeler Project Save from the pull-down menu. So that concludes the site preferences. So I'm going to close that and go next. Now I've created my project. I've got a project file, siteplan2d.gsf, and I have a model in there called tower. We give you the option to open up an object import wizard. This will allow me to bring in some surface data from like a 10 file and get started. So I'm going to go ahead and click that on. Click OK. The project's created, and now I'm into a new wizard called Import Data Wizard. The file type that I'm going to import is a 10 file. There's other file types we could import, land.xml being one of them. I'll select the 10 file, click Browse, and select the supplied ground.10 surface that was part of my project data. We have a course in Power Civil that focuses directly on creating 10 files. So you can learn how to create those surfaces. I'll click Next here. The object type that it's going to be, I'll select from my available list. These were the ones created earlier. So if I select existing ground, for example, or ground, and again, that list is coming from project preferences. And we opened up our by level SPF file, and that had the different object types in there. So I click. So what I'm going to do is select ground, and it's going to take on the default name, ground 1. I could overwrite the name of the object if I want. I'll click Next here. And the last thing in the wizard is to say, do you want to use this as the base for your model? And I do in this case. So the ground surface is going to be the base for all the things that I model on top of it. I click OK, and it imports the surface. So at this point, we brought in the surface, and we're ready to start modeling. And we'll do that next.